Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carolinas Weather Group. You are watching a delayed edition. We are trying to get some technical issues worked out, and we went live just because we've had several people message us see if the show was on tonight. It is. We're just trying to get the technical issues cleared with Dr. Forbes. So Ricky is working on that from the backside of everything. So we're going to kind of ad lib until Ricky gives me the go ahead that everything's good to go on his side, and we will start the interview. But we do have Dr. Forbes with us. We've been communicating at least for an hour now, trying to get his microphone and camera on his computer set up. So just bear with us. We appreciate you guys viewing tonight and sending us a message, letting us know where are you. So here we are. This is a live broadcast, obviously. So I'm thinking I got the okay to go. So I'm going to turn it over to Ricky and let him start with the interview.
And we can't hear Ricky.
I can hear you on the phone.
Well, there's Dr. Forbes.
Dr. Forbes.
All right, well, we can hear Dr. Forbes, but we can't hear Ricky when he's plugged into the thing. So, yeah. So, Scotty probably
I will handle the interviews until we can get Ricky's connection figured out. So, Dr. Forbes, you can't hear us, correct?
I can hear you.
All right, very nice.
All right, we got you. All right, well, Dr. Forbes, we appreciate you coming on tonight, and thank you for bearing with us with the technical issues. We hope you're doing well tonight.
Happy.
His connection's kind of fading in and out. So, Dr. Forbes, we're going to start tonight. We appreciate you coming on here on this the day before Thanksgiving. And one of our first questions we just want to talk about is kind of give us an idea of your background in weather. What's got you started in weather? Kind of lead us through the early years of Dr. Greg Forbes and how you got to the Weather Channel at this point.
Maybe this doesn't sound like you're. Well, maybe now you are. All right. So I got interested in science in the 7th grade. The science teacher was taught a module on meteorology, and so at that point I thought I wanted to be a scientist, but I hadn't realized fully that meteorology was a true science. Most of the time, at that point, you saw comedians or clowns or just newscasters that were on the air. But between that science class and then watching a couple of meteorologists on television, this was in the Western Pennsylvania area, I thought, wow, you can become a meteorologist and make a prediction and then verify it and say it's a true science. So off I went into Penn State. I got my bachelor's degree. At that point, I thought I wanted to I learned about Fujita. I thought that I wanted to go to a graduate school and then get a master's degree, become a severe weather forecaster, but working with Fujita was too exciting, so I got a PhD and then got a faculty position at Penn State, taught there for 21 years, but when the Weather Channel expanded and were looking for a severe weather expert, it gave me the chance really to do what I originally set out to do. So to make a long story short, I don't know if you heard any of that or not, but that's how I got where I am today.
Yeah, we hear you loud and clear, and hopefully you can hear us now. We've got some questions for you. You're talking about Dr. Fujita. Research-wise, you spent some time with him. Talk to us about some of that. What some cool moments or some stories through those research years with you and Dr. Fujita?
Well, it was always exciting, and of course, I was there for the super outbreak in 1974, and then through his discovery period of microbursts. So I got there right after he had invented the Fujita scale. So starting in '74, we really got to put that to test. I did a lot of the original damage surveying for the Super Outbreak 74 tornadoes, flying around in Cessna aircraft, and initially was separate from Dr. Vegeta, but then in subsequent years in particular, he and I would sometimes go out together, or he would send me out as an initial scouting team, and then if I found something really interesting, he would come out and we'd fly together and then look at some things on the ground. So that was exciting. And then we would fly around. He had a contract with NASA. It was the early years, and NESDIS, what is now NESDIS. It was the early years of geostationary satellites. So he wanted to, and they wanted to find out if there was anything you could learn from monitoring cloud tops. And so we would fly around a Learjet above and just above or just off to the side of the clouds and monitor the up and down movement of the cloud tops, and then do the photogrammetry of that to look at up and down cloud motions. We saw some maybe 100-mile-per-hour overshooting top developments and collapses. Didn't seem to relate too well to tornado production, but we did fly over top of a few storms early in the year when the storms were low enough that Learjets could fly safely over them, and saw some little collapse topses. So that led to it was collapsing down that was involved in tornado genesis. As it turns out now, that rear flying downdraft is a key factor, but we don't think it comes the whole way down from cloud tops. The thermodynamics don't really match with that.
And Doctor, being with Dr. Fujita, talk to us a little bit about how that's kind of translated to you now going out into. I've watched videos today of you being in the Oklahoma area during the outbreaks in 2013, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But talk to us a little bit about what you learned about going out on those damage surveys and how that's helped you as you go out into the field these days.
Well, it certainly had a lot of chance then working with Dr. Fujita to examine damage, and I flew over hundreds of tornado damage paths, so I'm really well familiar with the Fujita scale, and I was part of the panel that changed that to the enhanced Fujita scale back a few years ago now, so that what the cumulative effect of all that has been that I've seen so many tornadoes and so much tornado damage that when I see something new that I haven't seen before, that really jumps out at me and says, boy, that's probably going to be a really intense tornado. So in the case of the El Reno tornado, the Moore tornado that preceded El Reno, we were right beside a school there, and I was looking around in between our broadcasts and saw this odd-looking huge tank thing. And so I went and asked some of the residents that were there cleaning up, was this thing really in the middle of your subdivision? And they said no, it flew in from the farm a half mile or a mile away. So this thing weighed like 10 tons. And so I said, holy smokes, this has got to be an EF5 tornado. You just don't see things this big flying through the air for those kind of distances and falling out of the sky into a subdivision. As it turns out, there was another one of them that landed on the school and collapsed part of the roof.
Wow. I know myself and Joey was able to be out in the Moore, Oklahoma area this past February, and just looking at the damage, not necessarily damage today, but looking at the area and just knowing that all the craziness that happened there, I could imagine the big EF5 moving through that area, and it seemed like there's just rows of houses right through there, so I can't imagine what the people experienced that day.
Yeah, and some of that same area had been hit also in 1999 and in other years since then. So that there are places that used to be there that are no longer there, or have been there, been rebuilt, and then damaged or destroyed again. So it's one of the most tornado-prone alleys in the U.S.
Dr. Forbes, I was trying to read some Facebook comments about the show, and I kind of missed that for a second. Did you say the big, like, 10-ton tank that you saw, was that in the El Reno tornado?
No, that was the Moore tornado. And it was rated EF5. That tank had come from a horse farm that it was a half mile or so away.
Okay. I was just wondering because I know that the El Reno tornado ended up being rated an EF3, and you might know a little bit better on that than I think with EF3. But a lot of people have thought that was definitely an EF5 tornado, but it just didn't hit any structures at the time, I think, to cause the damage. Maybe you give us a little bit of background on that, maybe.
Yeah, there were mobile Doppler radars on the El Reno tornado, and the kind of wind speeds that they saw at their lowest elevation angles were indicative of over 200 mile per hour winds, which would make it EF5. But it was in a pretty rural area, and it only hit like one farm, and so the kind of damage that it did, or the kind of types of structures that it hit, were only supportive of EF3 damage. And so there was that discrepancy there. Initially, the Weather Service rated it EF5 based upon all evidence available to them, but NWS headquarters argued that it should be, to be consistent with what has been done in the past, that it should be based on damage, and so they went back to EF3 for that reason.
Well, I've wanted just to follow up on that a little bit, because that was a pretty hot topic in the weather community at the time. Do you see any changes coming in the future where we are going to start using maybe that mobile Doppler data or anything like that to get a truer accurate reading of what these tornadoes are actually rated at?
Well, what the head of the Weather Service did was to ask a panel to look at that, and I don't think that panel has done a tremendous amount on that yet, but I think ultimately the recommendation will come down, and then the Weather Service will have to approve it, that the rating should be based upon the preponderance of evidence. There's still some issue in the research community about how well the winds at measurement level translate down right to the surface, and so there may be some pushback there that there's not quite enough data yet to use the mobile Doppler radar when it's 50, even as low as 50 feet above the ground. That the translation of that, or the what would be the rectification of that down to the 10-meter level is not maybe the same for every tornado. But the other issue, of course, is that maybe only a couple % of tornadoes wind up being measured during the course of the year. So it would be an incomplete database. But of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in the historical database. There have been changes from F scale to EF scale. There's been, even implicitly in between those two, the working in of engineering practices that said that the original Fujita scales were too high, and then there's office to office variations, and just the variation of things that can, or sometimes are, and sometimes nothing to be hit, makes the whole rating of tornadoes pretty nebulous, to say the least.
Dr. Forbes, while we're talking about the El Reno event, we had Mike Bettis on the show earlier this year, back in March, and this was an event that we talked about with him as he was out in the field chasing the storm. Kind of give us your perspective as you're there in the studio communicating with Mike that day when the El Reno tornado came through.
Well, initially, Mike had been off north of the storm and was on his way trying to head south toward the storm, but had to stop and do a NBC nightly news broadcast. So he was a little bit behind the curve there in terms of the way things were evolving on a day that was pretty murky. There was a big line of storms that formed, with the El Reno storm being on the south end of it. So he had to do some, if not core punching, at least rain punching to try to get there. And he did manage to get there, and just as the big El Reno tornado was really starting to crank up. But some really odd things happened right around that time. He was on air broadcasting live and saw the tornado approaching and getting pretty big and pretty close, and said he had to go. And they tried to run, quote, run, literally figuratively run in the vehicles away from the tornado. They were on a divided highway pointing southward, and so they just hopped in and headed that direction. But the tornado grew big in size, accelerated a little bit, and then made a bit of a northward jog, all of which are pretty unusual. Usually when tornadoes make a left turn, they weaken, or if not weaken, they slow down and get narrower. That's usually a robot type stage. So getting bigger and stronger and faster and making a left turn all at the same time are pretty unprecedented for tornadoes. And they almost outran it. Had there not been a suction vortex that caught them, or had it not gotten so big, they probably would have been able to outrun it going southbound. The two of the three vehicles did not get as far south, ironically, and they came through it okay. He just got into the path of a little suction vortex. Some of the damage surveyors flying an aircraft afterwards were able to spot his path and position, and then they related that to the mobile Doppler and found that he got right into that central suction vortex core where the winds were the strongest.
And talk to us about your feelings. I mean, as we all are in the meteorology world, we don't want citizens to be out in the elements, but Mike's there covering a story for you guys and getting essential data and reports. Talk to us about what your feelings are as you're there trying to relay the news to the folks in El Reno, but then you're also worried about a co-worker there.
Yeah, that period was really hectic as we were trying to cover it on air and warn the folks. New radar scans were coming in, and the next scan that came in after Mike ended his live broadcast really got confusing. The tornado intensified so much that it wound up what we call velocity folding. The velocities got faster than could be resolved with the initial range, and so the radar came in with some goofy looking color schemes because of that folding. It wasn't able to fully resolve the full wind speed. And so sort of those next couple of minutes we were trying to figure out what the heck was going on with the velocity, and then the next time the scan came in, that we could really see what happened, and without a whole lot of confusion, we sort of recognized that the tornado had seemed to have gone right over Mike's last position. We were on the Gibson Ridge radar. We had it rigged up so that his vehicle position would show up, and his vehicle position was basically still showing up pretty close to the same place that it had been. So then the reality struck. Geez, Mike, wonder if he got out of the tornado. And so I went scurrying over to our video acquisition desk and asked if they were still able to be in contact with Mike, and they said no, they had lost contact for the moment. I said, oh gosh, I think the tornado hit him. And so I think then we started expressing on air concern that Mike Bettis's position might have been hit, and then I think within the next 5 minutes or so we were able to hear from him that they were there and okay, and I think they started talking on air, but it turned out not to be Mike's cell phone, but it, I guess, had been thrown away and lost by the tornado. It was a cell phone that came in from the next vehicle that they were coming down to check on their colleagues, and then we were able to talk to Mike through that, is my understanding of the situation.
Wow.
I know Kit has a question that's going to change it a little bit here. Before we go, did you guys get nominated or win any kind of Emmy awards for that coverage? Because it was some pretty special coverage that day.
I believe we put in for I know for a fact that we put in for an Emmy consideration the broadcasting that day and an aftermath special, but we as well as you may have seen, there was sort of a 3D animation kind of creation we had where we had a semi flying over my head and things like that, but we didn't get any Emmy awards for it.
Well, I would definitely have to go back and try to look to see who won for that and who got nominated, because it must have been pretty good coverage. Since the first time I spoke to you in person, kudos to you guys for that coverage that day, because it was definitely intriguing.
Thanks. It was right after Mike got back. It was some pretty emotional type of times also, with knowing that he could have been killed and his team could have been killed, and and that we had lost Tim Samaras and his son and friend there not too far away from that same tornado. So pretty emotional. Some of the more emotional times that I've had on the Weather Channel.
Yeah, no doubt. When we had Mike on our show, especially talking about the Joplin tornado, I think that one hit him very close, maybe even more so than the El Reno tornado, with some of his emotion when he was on the show with us, and that was it was 5 years later, basically. So definitely. But Kit, I think you had a question you want to jump in with.
Yeah, thanks, Joey. So I just sort of wanted to start segueing more to just sort of general knowledge. So you started talking about how the El Reno tornado did something that should have made it weaken by taking that left turn, but it just kept intensifying. Talk a little bit about how tornadoes can intensify and weaken from just their general path, and some things that can happen with that.
Well, normally it's all related, as far as we know, and some of this has been shown from computer models of tornadoes and their relation to the rear flank downdraft. But what seems to happen is that some surge of the rear flank downdraft gets involved in triggering the tornado. It brings down to the ground some of that rotation that's aloft in the supercell, and then the the thunderstorm's updraft and inflow recycles that and converges that, and quickly then spins up a tornado when all is right. If the downdraft isn't too cold, and it can pull that rear flank downdraft air right back up. So that's how the tornado can happen almost instantaneously, because that strong rotation gets down to the ground. Otherwise, the supercells are rotating up within the cloud instead of down a cloud base. But that said, when the rear flank downdraft seems to get too cold and too much of the cold air wraps around the southwest side of the storm, that often then will wrap around the east side of the tornado and choke it off. When that happens, then the tornado usually makes a left turn and starts to contract, gets ropey as the updraft still tries to pull up, but it's more stable air, so you get a narrowing instead of this big wedge tornado. What seemed to have happened in the El Reno case was that as that rear flank downdraft came down kind of strongly, it for at least for a little while strengthened and widened the tornado while it still forced it to make a little bit of a left turn. So maybe that downdraft was just so strong, and maybe it was not cold enough to really choke off the tornado in this case.
Dr. Forbes, I had a viewer question. Oh, I'm sorry, Kit.
Go ahead. I was just leading into you.
Oh, okay. All right. Dr. Forbes, I had a viewer question who but actually kind of fits in what you were sort of discussing there. She wants to know, it's Sheila, the guys on the panel know Sheila. She's asked us many questions before, but she would like to know what, explain in layman's terms, what is an unstable air mass?
Well, an unstable air mass is one in which there's real warm, moist air down at low levels, and then it cools enough as you go upward so that bubbles of air from the ground can rise upward and form thunderstorms. And so if it's too warm aloft or too cool or too dry at low levels, then you may be too stable for those bubbles to rise. So thunderstorms, as I often talk about it to laypersons, are just big parades or continuous processions of warm air bubbles that are rising. And so that's, in essence, the concept of instability. They're hot air balloons, basically. The updraft of a thunderstorm only rises if it's warmer than air surrounding it. The exception with that is that once the thunderstorm forms, and if it rotates, then it can get a low pressure aloft, and that can suck up some air that's a little bit stable near the ground. And that seems to be sometimes the case in the way the tornadoes form when the rear flank downdraft is not extremely unstable, but not so cold that it's still able to be lifted up into that supercell's low pressure aloft.
All right. Well, that's that was a great explanation. Scotty, write down that a parade of hot air bubbles. That'll be great when we go talk to the kids in schools and stuff. That's a good one.
Yeah, I jotted that one down.
I think
you wanted to.
Question. Joey?
Oh, go ahead, Kit. Go ahead.
Okay. I do want to throw in a quick conceptual question. It doesn't happen very often, but on a rare occasion you can have a clockwise rotating tornado and supercell. So does it still create that upper level low pressure and still suck in that extra air, or is it just a rare occurrence we haven't been able to study it?
Well, most of the time, these anticyclonic, clockwise rotating tornadoes do occur in the vicinity of a supercell thunderstorm, and they often happen when there's a big counterclockwise or cyclonic tornado nearby. What seems to happen, that rear flank downdraft that comes down, and as I talked about, sort of sometimes wraps around the tornado and causes it to make a left turn. On its counterclockwise side is the counterclockwise tornado, but sometimes there's enough enough strong variation of the winds on the south side of that rear flank downdraft that it will spin up a clockwise tornado, and so that is sometimes, in fact, often you get this pair, a counterclockwise and a clockwise tornado, simultaneously and marching together. Once in a while, you'll just get this odd wind shear from a gust of wind from the thunderstorm that will get sucked up in an updraft and will cause a clockwise rotating tornado. But the more common than not, and I've seen it in damage that I studied under Fujita in the Iowa tornadoes of '76. It was a huge, and then in video at the same that we got from that case, big counterclockwise tornado with a couple miles away, a parallel moving, and they moved exactly the same direction and took the exact same turns and so on with the anticyclonic tornado, as if it really strongly suggested that they were related to this rear flank downdraft in between.
So it's more a matter of, I've only ever heard that they happen, but I've never heard that they happen in tandem with other tornadoes too.
Yeah, it really does seem that sort of the model for the anticyclonic tornado occurrence is that it's it's a couple miles off or a mile or so off to the south of or southeast of a counterclockwise tornado, separated by the rear flank downdraft in between, and the different shear on either side of this rear flank downdraft, counterclockwise on its north side and clockwise on its south side, is what's fanning or fueling the two tornadoes.
I'm not even sure any of us even remember the last time we had a big giant supercell around here. But anyway,
2011.
Well, yeah, 2011. I guess that would wow, it has really been that long. I'm gonna go cry. But Peter, I think you have a question you want to jump in with?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, comparing the super outbreak of '74 to the April 2011 outbreak, would you think that the 2011 outbreak was worse in the 74, or do you think it's the same, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually was looking at some of the stats for that, trying to do it somewhat objectively, and I've got a scheme that I use that try to rate tornado outbreaks that uses the number of tornadoes and the total path mileage and the number of deaths and injuries and damage and so on. And the two of them come out very close, with I think 74. I've forgotten the answer myself now. 74, I think, in that scheme, slightly behind I'm trying to look it up on my computer to refresh my memory. Slightly behind the 2011 one. Yeah, 2011 comes in. No, 74 by my scheme still ranks number one, with a 75 out of 100, and 2011 comes in number two with 70. But they're very, very close. So, and it depends how you sort of rank the various, or more. Let's see. There were more. The category 4. It still had categories as well. So it came out very close in terms of. 2011 was a lot longer lasting kind of episode. It was about twice as long in duration as the 74 one, which was literally 24 hours. So really interesting. 74 covered a little bit bigger area, but both of them surprisingly got not almost all the way from the Gulf of Mexico up into the Great Lakes. So interesting. I covered one of them from a damage survey standpoint, and I covered the other one live from a media standpoint.
Dr. Forbes, that kind of leads me to one of my questions. I would like to talk a little bit about 2011, especially the month of April. Earlier that month, early to mid April, we had the tornado outbreak here in the Carolinas, eastern North Carolina to be exact. And then a few weeks later, another outbreak that started out in Alabama and then actually moved into western North Carolina. We had a few weaker tornadoes, nothing like Tuscaloosa or anything in Alabama, but kind of talk to us about that month, the month of April 2011, with the North Carolina outbreak. Kind of what you remember of that, and what sticks out in your mind, and then kind of talk about Tuscaloosa and then moving into the Western Carolinas towards the end of the month.
Yeah, that was really an anomalous month there in terms of just outbreak after outbreak after outbreak. We had, I think maybe back in 2008 or something like that, we got into about a 10-day period where each day had a tornado outbreak. But this was even longer, that literally almost the entire month from beginning to end had outbreaks with every weather system that came through. So it was a month that kind of got locked into a favorable upper air pattern with an upper trough that was pretty much right over the central part of the country, and a jet stream that was really strong, running from the northwest, Pacific Northwest to the southern plains, and then up across the Gulf Coast states into the northeast. And so every disturbance that came through that was tapping into Gulf of Mexico moisture and giving tornadoes. Many of them were small outbreaks, and then some bigger ones as well. So going into the April 27th, there had been tornadoes every day back starting on the 25th from that, and it was pretty clear then that the 27th there was going to be another one of these shortwave disturbances within that, and the computer models were just off the charts in terms of some of the parameters. And so even the day ahead of time, I'd given a torcon of 9 for Alabama, with the shear being at near record levels and the instability at near record levels, and then the trigger coming through there, so that all the parameters were there at near record proportions simultaneously. A lot of times you get big instability and not much shear, or the other way around. In this case, everything was coming together. The only question was going to be, was there going to be so much rain and that it was going to hold down the instability? But then when there was a boundary it set up on the morning of the 27th from the overnight thunderstorms, a boundary setting up there just south of where the worst tornadoes occurred, and some sun coming out south of that, we raised the torque on to 10 for that reasons. But it was a really tiring month. It was hard to keep up with all the tornadoes and including the Carolinas outbreak that had occurred earlier in the month.
Yeah, we did a show about that earlier this year, specifically on the Carolinas outbreak. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What you remember of that, and I mean, for around here when we get EF3 tornadoes, those are fairly strong. So especially for our friends around Raleigh and Fayetteville and places like that.
Yeah, well, if it hadn't been, if we hadn't had April 27th that year, we would have been talking at the end of the year and for years on, not about the Tuscaloosa Day or the super outbreak, but we'd have been talking about the tornadoes earlier the month that hit the Carolinas. So yeah, it was just huge. I certainly remember on air some of those days talking about all those tornadoes that were coming through. They all had just classic hook echoes, and some of them had debris balls, so that it was really, really, really scary. I think we had Jeff Morrow, one of our meteorologists, out in the field somewhere in the vicinity of those. So yeah, that was a really busy day. It's probably would have been the year's headline maker had it not been for from what happened later in the month.
I remember watching the coverage with Nate Johnson and WRAL. One of their tower cameras was up on the skyscraper in downtown Raleigh, and just watching the tornado move into the downtown area was pretty frightening. It's something you don't always see here in the Carolinas. So that was definitely an attention getter here for us in the month of April.
All right, you spoke about Jeff Morrow. Put in a word with Jeff that we'd like to have him on the show one day. I've always been a Jeff Morrow fan for some reason. I know, we know Jim Cantori gets all the love, but I always liked Jeff's coverage. But anyway,
well, Jeff's working up in. I think he's the chief meteorologist up in Nashville now on one of the TV stations there. So maybe he's in your audience. I don't know, but
well, yeah, we'll have to try to get him. I knew that he had went on to a different job. I wasn't sure where he was at. But all right, Dr. Forbes, I'm gonna touch on a question here that's a little bit of a hot topic in the weather community. You mentioned your Torcon scale, and just to throw in both sides of it, some people aren't thrilled with maybe the specifications of the Torcon or maybe exactly how it's laid out. So take a few minutes and maybe just kind of explain how you come up with the numbers, kind of what they mean, some actual hard evidence that can maybe quiet some of those doubters about the Torcon scale.
Well, I do it subjectively. I look at the low level wind shear. At lowest 1 kilometer is a big ingredient for tornadoes, as well as a little bit deeper layer in order to get supercell thunderstorms. Look at the instability. You have to have enough instability to get thunderstorms, and in particular, look at the 0 to 1 kilometer energy helicity index. So if those are all looking pretty favorable, then the next thing that you typically have to have, at least if you're going to get a lot of tornadoes, is to have a big upper air weather system, what I would call the triggering coming in to put everything together. And so sort of if all of those are coming together, it's probably going to get a Torcon of 5 or higher. And when they all come together really strongly, like the super outbreak, the number might get up there, 8 or above. I think Moore day was maybe a torque-on of 8 type of thing. So the design of it was made such that because people are kind of familiar with the scale of 0 to 10 of rating things, anything from the Olympics to some of the game shows on television, and whereas people are not so comfortable with probabilities, and so but on the other hand, there's some people that are comfortable with probabilities, and a lot of people have come to sort of use 30% chance of rain as sort of the delineator. If it's 30 or less, it's probably not going to rain. If it's above that, it probably is. It winds out then that a torque-on of 3 sort of is a similar. If it's less than 3, it's probably not going to tornado, or it's going to be really, really spotty. If it gets higher than 3, it's the kind of a day that is increasingly more dangerous or widespread in tornado coverage. And the way that we got to that, with the Storm Prediction Center puts out its probabilities, but they use a 50-mile scale. You can see on their website each day their tornado probabilities for the day. They don't put it out days ahead of time. But their numbers are small. A huge day would have a probability of 10%. Most days are 5% is sort of the common. And so that's not high enough that if you use those publicly, that it would get anybody's attention. It just doesn't sort of relate. And it's because they use a 25-mile radius. By using 50-mile radius, that sort of ballpark figure gets the torque-on area, and the values can be 4 times higher than what the SPC has. So usually, if you sort of use that translation, what they have and what I have aren't too radically different, although I do make mine independent of theirs. So that's sort of the gist of it. The rationale that we used when we developed it, and we started it back in 2009, was we wanted to have some way of getting sort of the public's attention. You get tornado watches all the time, and you get severe weather outlooks all the time. We wanted to have some sort of way of getting a little bit higher attention given for, when we were going to have situations upcoming that maybe were going to be more dangerous, or at least seem more likely to be having tornadoes than just the run-of-the-mill kind of day. And so that was sort of our justification, or our rationale for going this way, and the public in general seems to love it. I know there's some critics out there, but I think it's overwhelmingly positive, the feedback that we've had.
Yeah, I think point scale, of 1 to 10. I love that idea. I think that's definitely a way to keep the, obviously this is, we do these things, us in the weather community, we can look at the same data that you're looking at, we can make our own decisions, but the general public, that's a great way to do it. I think some of the criticism that I hear is maybe just like the exact parameters. What exact parameter is always going to give a 4, or is it always going to give an 8? Maybe just where those, kind of where you come up with the number at, where your idea kind of falls in. That's kind of the only thing that I usually hear. But like I said, I love the 10-point scale, and then of course the difference between the National Weather Service's 25 miles and the 50 miles can be confusing to some people, because I've heard people say, well, the National Weather Service says there's a 5% chance of a tornado, and the Weather Channel's got a torque-on of 7, and they don't understand the correlation between the two. So I think you did a good job there of kind of explaining that. So hopefully some of our viewers can tune in and hear that explanation. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Do a little bit of follow-up on that. There is no set formula that I use. But my general thought is that the upper air forcing is about 50% of the story. I mean, you can look at CAPE pretty much every day of the spring and summer, and you'll find that there's enough CAPE there for severe thunderstorms. And CAPE is way overused. It is, studies by researchers, shown that it's a real poor delineator of severe thunderstorms. And so there's a lot of people out there that love to use CAPE, and I think it's way overrated. There's a lot of people using deep layer shear. By the way, going back to CAPE, one of the real smart meteorologists out there, John Davies, has suggested that we ought to be using the CAPE in the lowest 3 kilometers. It really doesn't matter if you get up in the upper half of the thunderstorm. That's not where it matters whether you have still updrafts that are accelerating. It's down in the below cloud base, really, is where the critical vertical velocity is that does the stretching and does the tilting of low-level shear and stretching like the skater converging to spin up tornadoes. And so it's the CAPE. The reason why it's not a very good delineator is that it's talking about stuff up near cloud tops rather than is there any instability and how much down at right near cloud base. That's really the important part, which is really why I go into the 0 to 1 kilometer EHI is at least giving you something to that effect. But look, in that regard as well, I look at the individual soundings and see if there's going to be any of that kind of low-level instability there. But that said, still, it's usually the days that get a lot of tornadoes are the days that have strong upper air forcing. So it's virtually impossible to get a value higher than 5 unless there's really supportive upper air forcing. Most of the time, and this year was a real good example of that, the upper air forcing stays back behind. You don't really get the upper air feature that has come charging out toward the unstable area. You probably know the positive tilt. If the trough axis is oriented northeast to southwest, that's positive. If it goes the other way and it charges east so that the upper trough axis gets northwest southeast, those are the days you get the big outbreaks while it's in the process of doing that charging. So those are the kind of days that get the 6s and the 7s and higher kind of values. So if you're looking at, and it's experience of those kind of things, if you're looking at CAPE or helicity all by themselves, that's not the answer. It has to involve those building block, those baking ingredients, but the upper air forcing is what I see is what really bakes the ingredients together.
The amount of times that I've heard somebody scream, "Oh my God, 5,000 CAPE," and I'm like, "Well, it's 100 degrees outside. What do you expect?" But anyway, I know we're getting close to the end of the call. I think Peter had a question Kit had a question he wanted to throw in. So I'll let Kit throw in his question, and we'll get anybody else. And I always have my final question for our guests. So Kit, go ahead.
Yeah, so just within the science community in general, there's always talk about like verification, like how does it come out, like any sort of parameter or measurement that's predicted. So like how well does your Torcon scale verify? I really like the 10-point scale, like Joey was saying. It's a great way to get the basic information out to the public. But from a more technical aspect, like how well does the 0 to 10 scale verify?
Well, we're not verifying it, so it's hard to know. So I don't really know the answer. We aren't trying to verify enough to make the forecast and be on air, and we're not set up to do the verification. It's also hard to verify. At one point, we were talking about sort of entering the values into the computer, the same kind of system that we use to make all of our computer forecasts, and that go out, then they're computer based, and then they go out and make the computer graphics. But that really never got implemented, and so if we had done that, we would have had a digital database that we could have looked at and did a quantification then against the tornado paths after the fact, but we just never did that in our computer tool that our Global Forecast Center folks use. I think in general, the days that get tornadoes, often there's a little local boundary or some kind of mesoscale feature, and so some part of my broader tornado area gets a whole bunch of tornadoes, and should have had, if you could have predicted, had a torque higher than areas that maybe I gave a 3 or 4 didn't get tornadoes. So there's a lot of things like that. In general, there's a fair amount of skill there in recognizing the 3-4 days. There'll be going to be tornadoes somewhere within the general region versus the days that are 6 and higher are going to sort of be the worst day. So I think there's some skill there, but it's far from perfect.
All right,
But
Dr.
I think it in general is doing what we set out for it to do. That it's those higher value days are there to get the public's attention on those days that wind up being with the bigger threats.
Hey, kid, you have a senior thesis coming up if you want to work on verification of work on.
I'll take it.
That should keep you good and busy. Scotty, you got something? Go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Forbes, I know it's approaching an hour, and we don't want to keep you too much longer. A couple of quick questions that Ricky had that I wanted to pass along. The first question is, let me scroll up here and look at it. What do you see the future of severe weather broadcasting being? What do you think the future is in severe weather broadcasting? As you work at the Weather Channel, what would your input be on that?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think if you pose the question, what's the future of severe weather warning and communication? I think the answer is going to be that more and more of the public is going to be getting warnings on their mobile devices that have built-in GPS system. The smartphones have that, and people are going to get their warnings that way rather than through the old systems like NOAA Weather Radio that are still warning for whole counties even years now after they've gone to storm-based warnings, just because of the technology of their NOAA Weather Radio type system. And as the Weather Service goes more and more to storm-based warnings, and then even probably 10 or 15 years down the line, it will be warning on forecasts if the computer models can get good enough that it can really predict the supercell tornadoes are going to form, and the details of that, the lead times could become longer and maybe more pinpointed in space. So I think we go 10 years down the line, the face of things may look a lot different. It may not be the TV broadcaster that's the I think there'll always be and there's always going to be television. There's always going to be no weather radio. But we even found out in some of the Alabama after the fact social media surveys that they did after the super outbreak 2011. They found out that even people in some of the rural areas of Alabama were already getting warnings by a whole diversity of measures, anywhere from TV to no weather radio, and that was a big player, to friends phoning them, to all the various media devices. They were getting Twitters, and they were feeds, and they were getting stuff on Facebook and so on. So I think those mobile device things are going to become more and more the way that individuals are going to get warned. I think it's still going to be very important for media to be, sort of focusing people days ahead of time on these biggest outbreaks are coming, because I always say that you can't count on, everybody getting alerted when the watch is issued an hour ahead of time, that may be too late. And if people don't have some way of getting the warning, 15 minutes ahead of time, they're in trouble. But I think the latter, warnings disseminated onto these mobile devices, we won't have to worry so much about the watches, and we'll worry more about the several day ahead of time that people can sort of maybe a little bit alter some of their plans to make themselves less vulnerable on some occasions.
And the last question I want to hit on that Ricky also had is, what are the effects of the strong El Nino that we're experiencing right now? What do you think those effects will be on severe weather-wise this winter and as we go into the spring of next year?
Yeah, that's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it seems at the moment that even though we're in a strong El Nino, the atmosphere hasn't maybe responded to it. That subtropical jet still, has not become dominant. We've had a couple of these upper air systems now, the cold pockets aloft, that have come down, and they haven't come down into Southern California. They've come across Washington or Oregon and then dipped south. So it really hasn't kicked in yet, I think, to the atmosphere that El Nino is upon us. We were sort of locked into that ridge over the Pacific so much that maybe is a bigger player than El Nino. Now, that said, in the past, for El Nino years, those have been relatively quiet for the winter and spring for the southeast, with the exception of the Florida Peninsula. February in particular, the Florida Peninsula has had some of their worst tornado outbreaks in El Nino years. But typically, if El Nino kicks in, the southeast for the winter season and early spring are cool and kind of wet, and so that is not especially conducive for a tornado pattern, and the severe weather statistics bear that out, that La Nina winters and springs are more active in the south than El Nino, but every situation is different, and even in an El Nino you can get the blockbuster upper trough that breaks the pattern and makes for an outbreak across the southeast, but that's been a little less common in past El Ninos than it has been in La Nina.
Well, I think with that, if there aren't any other questions from the panelists, we can go ahead and go on to Joey for his final question.
I think Peter had one he wanted to sneak in, get a quick answer on. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, Dr. Forbes, if there's one storm that just sticks out in your mind.
Wow. Well, that's an interesting question. I think El Reno is certainly a candidate for that. The Joplin tornado is certainly a candidate for that. The Tuscaloosa tornado is a candidate for that. That's interesting. For me, probably the super outbreak 74. I was so involved with the research of that's a big ingredient. The super outbreak of 2011 I was so involved with as a broadcaster, and that whole month of April 2011 was so involved with it. And then one when I was at Penn State, the Pennsylvania outbreak of 1985, with the one tornado that marched up and down the mountaintops for 65 miles. Those are some of them. It's hard to pick any one, I think, above the others.
Yeah, that one, that dance in the mountaintops. I remember that one. I think about that every time I hear people say that tornadoes don't happen in mountains. But all right, Dr. Forbes, I know we're going to wrap up toward the end here, and I have one question. First off, it's been a great show. I think we probably got enough questions in the bank to go to an hour someday. So,
I was gonna
yeah, I wanted to thank everybody. Sorry that it got started. My computer camera and microphone weren't working. Couldn't get to work, so that delayed us. But I'm glad everybody was able to participate.
well,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sorry, Joey. You're probably gonna say what I was gonna say. I could sit here another hour, hour and a half, 2 hours talking to Dr. Forbes. I mean, this has been a great show.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And I'm glad that we had the difficulties, but now we figured out another way that we can make this work if we ever run into it again. So thanks for being the guinea pig on that one. But
And as my point, when you were talking about TorCon and
I'm
all
not
that
in any
stuff,
hurry to get out of here. So if you guys have other questions, I'm more than willing. But if you have to want to call it an end, that's also fine with me.
well, we definitely, like I said, we definitely try to schedule another time maybe and get you back because we don't want to go too long. I hate to run up people's bandwidth to download the podcast. But
Yeah, that's true. So sure.
Anyway, one final question I ask all of our guests is, me and Scotty, we do a lot of work in schools, and I know Ricky has done some visits as well, and we have a lot of kids that are teenagers and school-age kids that watch our program, and especially teachers. We have a lot of teachers that like to watch our program. So I always ask all of our guests one question: if what would you tell, say, a student that's thinking about meteorology as a career, or a teacher who is trying to help groom a student to a career in meteorology? What would be the one piece of advice you'd like to give them?
Well, I'm going to answer that question, and I'll answer a question I thought you were going to ask me. I think the one I thought you might ask was what to tell them about being safe in tornadoes, and I think we probably ought to get more of this message out. I try as often as I can about helmets, because not just go to the basement, but if to grab a helmet if you have that, or store a helmet there. So there's a lot of people have some kind of helmets these days, and many of the fatal injuries are head injuries. And the sad fact of the matter is that if you're going to get hit by if you're going to get hit by a tornado strong enough that it is going to put your life in jeopardy, your home isn't going to, in most of those cases, isn't going to be big enough to protect everybody, but you can get an extra measure of protection from wearing helmets, and wear shoes also, so that if you do get the destruction, you can get out and about without getting your feet all cut up in the process. Now, to go back to your actual question, and I was a professor before I came to the Weather Channel, so even 20 years ago, I was telling students then to be diverse, because because of the visibility of meteorology, and the excitement factor from it, from storm chasing and just being able to predict the weather was exciting to me back how many years ago now? 40 years ago, I guess, when I was a student. And so there's a lot of people that would like to be meteorologists these days, and so you've got to give yourself a bit of an edge to get out into the job world. So don't just get locked into something that you want to be a TV broadcaster, or don't just get locked into something that you want to be a weather forecaster. Be versatile. Don't just take the forecasting classes. Take the classes that give you some theoretical background, because there's a lot of research behind the scenes, research applications. Take the computer classes so that you're able to use the data and manipulate the data. Take the communications classes, because you need those to be on air. You need those to, even if behind the scenes, if you're like at Weather, WSI, if you're making forecasts for clients, you've got to be able to make them understand the forecast and learn how to use it to, best for their purposes. And there's some fields that are under appreciated. For example, hydrology. Water is a huge factor, either from having too much of it from floods to too little of it from droughts. Water supply for communities and water protection for communities are going to be ever increasing issues, and so there are hydrology classes and hydrology programs, and you don't have to have very many of those to be classified as a hydrologist in the eyes of the National Weather Service, and that's an easier in to getting jobs than just coming in with a meteorology degree, taking the traditional kind of classes that are associated with that. So, and getting as much internship and as much non-classroom type experience as possible, so that you have unique items on the resume to make yourself stand out from the other job applicants. So that's a long answer, but be unique, I guess, is the short answer, and be versatile is the rest of that story.
That's a lot of really great information. And you'll be proud that me and Scotty, whenever we do our school programs, we have a 2-hour program. We spend probably 15, 20 minutes talking about helmets. So,
that's great.
That's
helmets, shoes, and goggles.
And we even talk
about
good. Even at school, if there's no helmets available, we tell them get a big thick book, cover your head, do something to cover that head. But I know we're getting close to the end. I will say one thing that my now 10-year-old son has decided he's going to be a doctorate. He's going to get his doctorates in meteorology, and that was because of Dr. Marshall Shepard. I think if he was here tonight, he might even change. He might become Team Forbes instead of Team Shepard. But yeah, he was enamored with Dr. Shepard, and we had him on the program. But anyway, I think that's all of our questions. Scotty, you want to wrap this up for us?
Yeah, I'll wrap it up. Hopefully, Dr. Forbes, we can get you back on maybe late February, early March, and maybe we can dedicate a whole show on how people can prepare for severe weather with severe weather season coming up in April. So if you'd be up to that, we can communicate, and maybe we can get that set up if that's okay with you.
Sure, as long as the weather will cooperate and we get a quiet night like this one, that'll be great.
Sounds good. Well, we'll email back and forth, and we'll see if we can make that happen. Since tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and I know you like this, what is your favorite type of ice cream? We know you're a big ice cream buff, so tell us, if Dr. Forbes only had one choice of ice cream, what would it be?
Well, that's a tough choice. I sort of have three favorites. Peanut butter and chocolate is a big favorite. I like Haagen-Dazs. No, Baskin-Robbins peanut butter and chocolate. I like chocolate chip. Baskin-Robbins is great at that, and then there's a extreme moose tracks, I guess, that are sort of chocolate and something inside the chocolate ice cream. So those are the three favorites that I sort of rotate through.
Well,
you need to come up and visit Gastonia, and I'll take you personally to Tony's Ice Cream, which is one of the best places that I've ever been to.
Sounds good.
And Dr. Forbes, maybe if we make it down to Atlanta, we'll take you out and treat you to some ice cream. How about that?
Sounds good. I'll always eat ice cream.
All right, Dr. Forbes, we appreciate you coming on tonight, and we hope you have a great Thanksgiving, and we hope all of our followers tonight hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Stay safe out there. Enjoy your family and friends, and don't forget, next week we are going to be talking about the South Carolina flood with a lot of our meteorologist friends from the state of South Carolina. And after that, Dr. Marshall Shepard joins us to kind of recap this year in weather. So make sure that you tune in for the next few weeks, and we look forward to next week's show. And once again, we thank Dr. Forbes for coming on tonight. We hope you all have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week.
Be seeing you.